I've got a theory that I want to float by you that, to be quite honest, I don't have any inside baseball information on this. This is just, you could call it a hunch, but when dealing with Libloons, you can call it a pretty close estimation of what they're going to do based on their past history. They know that a slaughter is coming for these midterm elections, if we can keep them honest. But they know that it's going to be an absolute red tsunami. And already they have tried to float different ideas as way of masking their own failure. For example, we have been told that the rising prices at gas and the supply chain shortages and the inflation is all a result of the sanctions that we had to place on Russia so that we could stand with Ukraine in their fight for democracy. I stand with the people of Ukraine. I feel horrible for what the civilian population is having to endure because two madmen have decided to clash with one another. And yes, I include Zelensky in that reference of madmen. He is executing his own generals. Funny how our media doesn't talk about that. He is castrating the Russian soldiers which are taken as prisoners of war because, quote, these evil individuals should not be allowed to reproduce. They are strapping these soldiers to lampposts and trees in community areas and allowing the citizens to come on and beat them until they're dead. You know, I thought we had this thing called the Geneva Convention, how all this is supposed to work. But again, the West has decided that Zelensky is going to be the poster child of freedom and democracy, despite the fact that Ukraine is not a democracy. That all said, gas prices were rising in this country before Putin ever rolled one tank into Ukraine. The inflation was beginning to be felt long before there was the Russian-Ukraine conflict taking place. And the supply chain shortages, that was going on when Pete Buttigieg was home on maternity leave, despite the fact he didn't actually physically give birth to anything. But, you know, he and his hubby, who have adopted children, they had to have their full maternity leave while America was in full-blown crisis, because there's never any idea of sacrifice on their part, only entitlement, but sacrifice on, quote, your part. You need to get used to rising gas prices until we convert over to a whole Green New Deal. That's basically the Pete Buttigieg idea of doing things. And a weak, feeble, drooling on himself, dementia-ridden, installed president, Joe Biden, with his hand out, begging countries, some of which are our enemies, to please give us some oil, please, even though we were energy independent under Donald J. Trump. But of course, under his woke politics, Biden wiped all that out, and now we have the problems that we have. That all said, the Democrats are really hoping that somehow they can convince you that what you're seeing and what you're feeling is not Joe's fault. It's not the fault of the Libloons who have come alongside to propel his agenda through Congress. They want you to believe it's all Russia, Russia, Russia. That said, I believe they're going to try that. One of the ways they will explain the bloodletting, which will take place in November, you guessed it, Russia, Russia, Russia. In other words, because of our crippling sanctions that we have done against Vlad Putin, which, by the way, that's a complete myth. Total myth. I told you, all that was going to do was force Russia and China to join forces. And when you saw all these companies like American Express and PayPal and all of these American credit type services decide, that's it, we're done with Russia. Wow. So you gave all those Russian people millions of dollars in credit, etc., and now you've said you're not going to do business there anymore. Good luck collecting your money. But you and I, the American consumer, the American creditee, We are the ones that are going to pay for that. You know that, right? Because they're not going to collect that money from the Russians, and I'm sure Russia wouldn't even allow their citizens to pay American Express or Discover Card or Visa or anybody else back at this point. And I said all the sanctions would do is drive President 11 from China and Vlad Putin together, and they would create an alternative economy. They'll create their own versions of PayPal and give each other credit and Shazam Batman. Even though the ruble took a hit in the first days of the Ukraine invasion, the ruble is now trading stronger than the US dollar. So, congratulations, Joe Biden. You and your ill-advised advisors have once again blown up the American economy, and you're going to try to blame all of this now on Russia, that because of your sanctions, that it's hurt our economy. But I believe you're also going to try this little stunt. See, you and I, as conservatives, we're not allowed to question anything about the 2020 election. We're not allowed to make reference to Atlanta polling places closing for hours in the middle of the count, and then Shazam, they reopen, and under tables, they find hundreds of thousands of ballots. We're not supposed to question what went on in Arizona. We're not supposed to question anything that happened in 2020. It was the most free and fair election ever held in the history of U.S. elections. Hillary can talk all about the election of 2016. Al Gore can talk all about the election of 2000, but we are not allowed to say anything about the election of 2020. But I promise you, the Democrats will talk about the election of 2022, and they will blame it, you guessed it, on Russia. It will be Russian disinformation. This will be the way they get revenge for the sanctions that have been brought against them, and they are going to manipulate the election and the election results. Watch. Not only will this be an attempt to explain heavy election losses, I don't put anything past these people to even try to somehow this summer, as they watch the polls get even worse, I don't put anything past them that they might even try to say, you know what, right now it's not, quote, safe to have an election. Yeah, think about that. Think about that. That's what they tried to use the whole pandemic for. That was why we had all that mail-in voter hogwash, and you got to have 6 months to vote because it wasn't safe to go out and vote in person. Well, now the spin will be it's not safe to vote at all because the Russians are everywhere. They're in the voting machines. They're in the envelopes. They're in the mailboxes. They're everywhere. You watch. Now, again, I don't have any insider baseball on this. I'm just looking at how libloons act. Here we are. They are still talking about the dossier, despite the fact the Federal Elections Commission has just slapped Team Hillary with fines, both to her attorney and to her campaign itself. It's a slap on the wrist, and the mainstream media is either not talking about it or trying to downplay it, but what they're really saying is, hey, the dossier was complete bogus, bullhawk, hogwash. The media's not talking about that. Everything that stemmed then from the dossier, a couple of impeachment proceedings, the attempt to discredit Trump, to invalidate his election, invalidate his presidency as being nothing more than a Russian op, which was all bogus. It was all a lie. It's now all traced back to Hillary. She paid for it. And henchmen on the GOP side, like John McCain, propagated this stuff as absolute Bible coming from the intel community. And it was all designed to destroy an American president, his family, his reputation. And we still have people, despite the fact it's been debunked, despite the fact the Mueller investigation, despite it costing millions of dollars and destroying certain people's lives, it was really, quote, a nothing burger. It doesn't matter. You've got half this country that still believes Russia, 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 collusion, 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 Trump, puppet of Putin. So when the Democrats try to spin the election of 2022 as Russia, 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 there will be people who believe it. This is all revenge for them standing with Ukraine. Okay. Some of you Republicans that are all in on all this propaganda when it comes to Ukraine, you might want to think that through a little bit, because you're going to own all of that hogwash. Now, that said, the Democrats will never admit what's really going to kill them in this election cycle, and it's a really simple premise. Leave the children alone. They, instead of acknowledging that the critical race theory cost them Virginia, instead of acknowledging that it is costing them school boards across the country now, CRT and this over-sexualization of children. This so-called Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, no, it's not. It has nothing to do with about being gay. It has about, we're not going to teach kindergartners and first and second graders and even third graders an over-sexualized curriculum. Remember when the Democrats' whole thing used to be, do it for the children. You had to do everything for the children. We had to protect the children. We had the innocence of the children. Now all of a sudden, they want to make children sexually in tune at age 5 when they're still learning how to spell their name, color in the lines, and count to 50. We're going to explain to them about gender choices and gender fluidity, and we're going to bring drag queens in to read to them. And Governor DeSantis and some other governors, and even Rhino Mike DeWiner in Ohio is going to adopt the same policy. But isn't it interesting, Mike DeWiner is only doing it because, number one, he's being primaried in his state, and some real conservatives are giving him a run for his money, and he's kind of nervous about that. But he's let DeSantis go ahead and take all the hits on the subject, and now that he realizes parents really like it, even Democrat parents, he gonna do it too and then try to run on it. Did you hear what I said? Democrat parents are for it too. I don't care whether a parent is a conservative or a liberal. There is a cardinal rule. Leave the kids alone. Let school be about reading, writing, and arithmetic. But you've wanted to have Project 1619 as the new definition of American history because it's all based on racism, man, despite the fact the curriculum is absolute flawed nonsense. We're celebrating Juneteenth now. Well, good, that's a Texas holiday. Republicans came up with that. Wait, what? Yeah. And then, of course, all of the CRT, which is really just racism on steroids, telling 5-year-olds they have to be guilty because they were born white, which makes them automatically privileged. Tell that to the white kid in the foster home who's being robbed of every form of innocence that a child ought to be able to enjoy. But just because of the color of their skin either makes you privileged or an eternal victim. We are erasing and eradicating history all in the name of, quote, social justice and purging. And now this over-sexualization of children. We're going to introduce hormone blockers. President Biden thinks that would be a good idea. Leave the children alone. Because there's something these particular libloons did not learn. The pandemic was a wake-up call to American families, by and large. And here I've said for years, the devil would be a lousy poker player. Because he always overplays his hand. Always. He always does more to the point where people eventually It isn't just that they feel overwhelmed by it. They just get to a point where, man, I am sick of this. They tried it with the lockdowns. They tried it with the mandates. And now Fauci's out there, still trying to be relevant. And certain Sunday news shows are still having him. And virtually nobody, including liberals, are listening to him anymore. Just the few extremes who wear face masks when they're alone in their cars and wear condoms to bed when they go to bed alone. And just the extreme fringe loons and loops listen to Fauci now. Fauci is completely an irrelevant annoyance. And at some point, the mask will even go away on airplanes. Thank God, hallelujah. So people are ready to get on with their lives, live their lives, because again, it was overdone. But one thing we did learn during the pandemic, and Americans got this by and large, they don't need the schools for their kids. Yes. That secular place of worship, the liberal intelligentsia, serving as the priesthood of all knowledge and equity and equality, wanted their schools to stay closed while its faculty and staff were vacationing in Cancun. They wanted kids attending school via Zoom. And now that the schools have begun to reopen and you've got teachers basically saying and educators basically saying, hey, what parents want to do in these classrooms is irrelevant. Wait, what? Because now, with the CRT and the sexualization of children, parents have figured out by and large, I don't have to put my kid in your classroom. I can enroll them in a private school. I can pick up and move to another school district where I like what they're doing in their schools. I can homeschool. There's Christian schools. There's cottage schools. I have been saying this for years. Get your kids out of the public schools. Get them out, get them out, get them out, get them out. They are not places of education. They are places of indoctrination. Will you please listen to me on this? They're not there to educate your children and give them the critical thinking skills they need to actually be able to think for themselves. They are there to be indoctrinated. This is why they want to teach 5-year-olds. It doesn't matter what kind of genitals you have. You're only a boy or a girl if you think you are. Do you grasp this? These liberals literally hate your children. They are sexual deviant perverts. It would be interesting to know how many pedophiles come from a liberal persuasion of thinking, wouldn't it? We never see studies on that. That said, the liberals are in big trouble heading into November. They know it. Get ready. It's going to be Russia, 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 and they will attack the validity of the 2022 election results. You mark it down. It will be Russian disinformation and Russian retaliation for the sanctions. It will have nothing to do with the fact that they have absolutely destroyed the economy, destroyed our sovereignty by declaring the borders wide open, and God bless Governor Abbott for putting illegals on buses and sending them straight to Washington, D.C. God bless governors like Ron DeSantis, who said, you are not going to sexualize our children. And even in the libloon land of California, Gavin Newsom is having a drastic wake-up call that his COVID policies destroyed his state and Florida flourished. And he's going to discover the same thing when it comes to even liberals leaving his state over the economy and over education. And it will have nothing to do with Russia, Russia, Russia. It will have everything to do with Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, AOC, and libloon tardationism.